you want to become a property manager. Maybe you are one, but you're thinking, I want to run a property management company, how these guys are saying the future of property management is going to look.
Right.
I don't want to get bought out. I want to have my own company, with my name on it, but be doing it really, intelligently and in the modern way. Like, what does that look like? Like, if you gave me 5 to 7 bullet points on what to make sure to do, what would we tell people to do?
Oh, is this thing on?
Well, cool. So I think when we talked before, we had some topics that we were geared up for. So let's just jump into those. So what do you guys think about just the leasing environment in general right now? I feel like a lot of our customers are starting to I think freak out a little bit because the vacancies are going up. A lot of seasonality changes that I think are causing an additional effect there. But then also it feels like something weird's going on in the market right now. Like rent rates are starting to drop. What are you guys seeing?
Well, I think it's just a matter of we've had really, really high rent appreciation for a couple of years through COVID. Through COVID, there was a lot of cheap money that was in existence. And I think some of that stuff is just causing the market to soften. So some markets like Austin that had 15 to 20% year over year growth, they're just not going to sustain that same level. And so it's going to go back to normal levels of 3% or flat. In some instances, maybe even a little compression where it's coming off from the last time that the home's leased. And investors of those properties are going to have to reset their expectations for underwritten rents. And so we're seeing that across the whole country. This is not just some regionalized thing. It's just the places that have the biggest rent appreciation or the places where there's going to have to be some takedowns on it. And this past fall, you're right, we've had a lot of interest in operational efficiency and leasing technology. We've started working with a lot of new customers. We've already been pretty large. We're up to 10,000 homes now across 14 states, servicing portfolios for REITs and property management companies. And because we've had that backbone and a lot going on, groups have been going to us to say, hey, what do we do with this market shift? How do we perform better? And a big part of what we've been doing over the last couple months is helping to use data to better examine that and to try to get a better picture of what the rent should be and why.
I guess, so do you think there's anything more than just there's a lot of supply still on the market? It's no longer COVID, so rent prices are not really going up. And then it's kind of like slow seasonality, all combined to make it so that, people are kind of freaking out. Is there any more than that? Is there a fourth thing?
I think that those are just the main X factors. It's just they're all coming together and people just haven't felt it. You mentioned seasonality. Every year between the fall and winter months, there's just way less people moving, about half as many people moving as there are in the summer. So you have that. Then with the market shifting, groups are just like, is this the new normal? Or is this a temporary thing? And it's not helping too that, I guess if there was a fourth thing to answer your question, I think the fourth thing is that the cost of buying assets is a lot higher now because interest rates have notched up the way that they have. And so the numbers are just a lot tighter. So any new investment is likely not going to perform well because the cost of capital is so high. And so that'd be a fourth thing is, it's just and that's basically for new inventory that they're getting in the pipeline.
I think most investors have explained the data and walking through the stats. I think they can make a lot of sense of it. But I think right now it's the tough thing is property managers having those conversations with their clients. And so how do you help your clients navigate that conversation? Because I'm sure you're probably seeing that quite a bit right now. And then I think that's maybe a good segue just into Sunroom leasing as a whole.
I think the first thing to realize is we've positioned our product for asset managers. They're typically financial analysts and big operating groups. But that's not to say we don't work with other groups like property managers. So we want to take some of the best in class types of software that exist, like the types of thinking that Invitation Homes might use, but then apply that more broadly to the SFR space. So I'll give you like just one example of how to take something that maybe was an emotional decision and then turning it into more of a data-driven decision. So historically, when homes aren't leasing, it's almost like this narrative that happens of like, how do people feel about it? Or like, what's your gut telling you about the rent price for this home right now? And it's a narrative that gets weaved through typically agents that are just trying to get a beat on the market. And we just found that that's not the best way to do things.
Right.
We believe that there's someone who is 500 miles away from that property sitting in an office that's looking at spreadsheets, and they're going to be able to price the home better than that person who just walked the property. And like, Zach, why is that? Well, for one, better initial rent setting when you come out with the price. So one of the things that we do is we look at off-market data that's happening with Zillow. We look at what's happening through the MLS transactions to capture the agent community types of pricing, and then we also look at institutional rents. So Tricon, Amherst, these really large buyers, and we're looking at how that data is fluctuating for the price. So we can get a really tight snapshot when we initially price the home, and then we see that as just the first line in the sand. So once the home's on market, we do things. One great example is something that Darius is actually the brainchild of.
I like brainchild. That sounds good, Darius. Or do you like that title?
Yeah, no, I'll take it. I'll put it on my business card. Yeah, I mean, to help owners like understand data and what we understand, like, I mean, you basically always are benchmarking your products, which is your home, against the market. And that's how people don't feel like they're, underperforming or overperforming. Like it's not just, let's see how the wind's feeling right now. So what we found was one of the most important benchmarks is how many leads are other listings in the area getting every week. And so, you could say, every home needs 10 leads a week, or every home needs some leads a week, but how many exactly are the homes that are similar getting in the area every week? And so because we work with all these different portfolios, we can tell you, well, we know how many leads per week these listings are getting, and let's just say it's 5. Now your listing is only getting 2 leads per week. So that's, as a percentage, that's 40%. And so you're not getting enough leads compared to your competition. And that's what we call the sunspot, which is kind of the sweet spot of leads.
I love the sunspot branding. We're gonna have to at some point you're gonna have to share your screen and show some of that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think the cool part about the sunspot, real quick, is like not only does it show you when you have too few leads, it shows you when you have too many leads. And oftentimes, property managers are telling you to lower the rent. We tell people to raise the rents.
Right.
And we do both lower and raise the rents.
How often are you raising the rents and that's successfully getting the outcome you're looking for? Like it's, you look at the data, you see you have 12 leads, the competition says 5 is the sunspot, you raise rent $50, $100. Are there some positive outcomes happening there?
Yeah, I've seen it work. I mean, it's uncommon because of most people price it high in the beginning and then work their way down as their pricing strategy. So most of the time, it's always getting reduced because they expect that. But I've seen it where they've reduced it too much, and then all of a sudden they're getting way too many leads, and then they raise it up, another $50, and it kind of gets back into the sunspot, and that's, it gets leased. It happens. It's just not common because of that strategy.
Yeah, and just to kind of go off that strategy thing a little bit. So one of the things that we found is that groups might initially price the home 5-10% over market asking, and then have a price algorithm. So do I drop it by 50? Do I drop it by 100? How long does it take before I should do the drop? Yeah. What happens if I don't do the drop? Will I actually end up leasing it? Like how sure are you of those drops? We've been even looking at data to see, okay, if you don't make the drop and it's had this type of pattern for this period of time, what percent likelihood is it to lease based off of thousands of leases? So now we're able to kind of take these things and then give you probability of outcomes off of the data that we're seeing. So I think really cool things of pricing strategies, which are all important when things are not moving as fast as they were before.
You got to present these things well too. Like, it's one thing to talk about it over a video call, and then it's like another thing to like send an owner a PDF or a landing page that shows them their product and how they're comparing to the things we're saying. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're a property manager out there and you're trying to figure out how to convince your owners to stay with you and maybe lower the prices, like, you need to have a great presentation of data that benchmarks their home.
Yeah, and to that effect, the last thing owners want to hear, or asset managers, is let's reduce the price. So the first thing that has to happen before that is you have to prove to those owners that without a doubt you're doing everything else you can from an operational perspective to drive demand, work that demand, and then effectively process the applications. So that's a big part of what we try to do inside of our product. And also just something that every property manager should be thinking about as they're working with owners. Like, how are you telling the story that you are getting the listing in all the places, you're calling them, you're texting them, you're doing that in an adequate quantity of times. Renters want to tour on nights and weekends mostly. What's the strategy for having that support at that time and helping renters navigate any questions that they have? I think traditionally people are taking those phone calls themselves or maybe using a VA, but there's holes inside of that schedule even.
Yeah.
One thing in terms of just working the leads better that we've been getting some success with over the last 2 quarters is for top of funnel inquiries, we get close to 30,000 plus text messages in a given month. I mean, that's an insane amount of volume.
It's a lot of text messages.
It's a lot of text messages. So when we saw OpenAI come out with some of these conversation models, we've been able to take that and apply it to our listings, train them on all of our policies, and then all the specifics of the listings, really build out the array of data that can get asked about, and then provide real-time response that yields better inquiry to tour conversion, and then show that with data.
Yeah, I think the data is key there. I think with conversations, like the biggest thing I think most people are looking for when they're looking to rent a property, like from the tenant perspective, is just like property managers that respond quickly. Just like being able to respond quickly is, I think, even more important than the actual response itself. And with OpenAI, I feel like those models have been improving so fast that, in a lot of ways, they're better than what humans going to write back. And so
it's so true. I mean, it can respond at any time of the day, and it could speak Spanish. It could speak every language. Like, I saw it convince someone who was speaking in Spanish at like 11 p.m. at night, which like no humans were working, to go tour the next morning. And that was the only time the person they like explained how to tour. The person ended up touring it that morning and then leased the home. Like, it's like, a human wouldn't have caught that.
Yeah, and you're right. It's like, it's not hard questions. They're like, does it allow pets? Well, if they read the listing, they would have seen it allowed pets. But
right.
They're almost testing you to figure out, are you going to respond fast once I'm living at the home or something like that?
Well, and I think like a big conversation that's happening in the property management space, whether it's like small mom and pop property managers or some of the customers you guys are working with that are much larger. I think it's been this conversation around human leasing, like the standard, more typical, you have a leasing coordinator, you have a leasing team, they're physically walking through the property with people, they're selling on the spot, that type of thing, versus, your model, which is very software process driven, data driven. I mean, that's a great example to me of like convincing me like, hey, that is a superior process because people can't respond, in Spanish in the middle of the night to, book leases. So what would you say to like where we've been, where we are today, and where that's going into the future in terms of the trend around, more of a software type approach?
When you kind of just take a step back of what's been some of the technologies and then processes. So in the 2000s, it was just the rise of mobile and internet listing sites. So it was all just top of funnel and driving demand there. over the last, maybe I'd call it like 5 to 10 years, it's all been about trying to take these complicated criterias and just accommodate through different settings and then have that work with property management software, right? So accommodate different workflows, basically.
So first it was like Zillow. Zillow comes out, makes it easy to syndicate listings to the internet.
Yeah.
Then you had the Zillow app on mobile. Mobile is more popular, so it's more accessible. Average Joe Schmo can post something to Zillow to get leads. And then now we're moving into, so what's that? What was that next jump?
Yeah, so this next
Workflow
jump
management.
was basically workflow management. So it was softwares that started to exist to accommodate different settings that property management companies had. But in this period that we're in now, it hasn't been a uniform thing. So, it's like it has different workflows, but people are stringing together different tools. So you're using Zillow for top of funnel, you're using Appfolio for middle of funnel or bottom of the funnel. Maybe you have a different like utility like Findigs put in there to do better screening. So you got this hodgepodge of stuff and you're trying to accommodate workflows and you have people that are doing things behind the scenes.
Right.
So maybe the last 2-3 years, people have got a little bit savvier with trying to get lower cost labor to do the non-licensed activities for that stuff, but there's still people doing everything because you're kind of meshing together everything.
I mean, it's gotten cheaper because of VAs, the virtual assistants. I mean, it's gotten cheaper because there has been more self-showing technology. Like they've successfully pieced together a Frankenstein thing that is probably cheaper than what they had before, but it's not much more efficient in terms of just getting leads through the funnel.
So the next wave of stuff that's going to happen is there's going to be a convergence of the technology and people to make it so you don't actually need the people anymore. Effectively, it's going to become self-service to the point of not needing a person because it knows all the settings. It can make decisions based off of, trends you're seeing within the data. You're getting a uniform look of the entire funnel. From inquiry to tour to application processing. And then you're getting really good at all the tools that can do each one of those areas of the funnel at ways that, a person reviewing a pay stub just wouldn't be able to do. So, over the last just to nail that last point home, over the last 5 years, you've been having a person review a pay stub. And they're like, okay, here's how much they make. I can see it happen the last 3 times. I can see that this document doesn't look fake. Okay, I'm going to review it, check the criteria for the listing, and then I'm going to go through an approval process.
Yeah.
Well, now it's going to be programmatically checking their bank account, have the logic for what you do about these and the conditional approval type of things, and then just automatically go through a workflow. So software will do a better job at catching issues than the people would even be able to.
Yeah, and it takes out the human emotion from it too, because I think wasn't there that I feel like it was featured in some book I read, so I'll probably butcher it, but it was judges that were seeing criminal, they're determining the verdicts in person.
So true.
And it wasn't consistent with the outcome. A lot of it was based on the time of day, before lunch break, after lunch break, all these human emotional outputs that resulted in a much different outcome, right?
That's so true.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's so much bias.
Yeah.
I love the fact of the machine just, setting it and looking at just the screening criteria.
Yeah.
Instead of a landlord looking at someone's name.
I'm guilty of it on the property management side. When I first got started, I don't know how many times, I set my criteria. I'm following EOS traction. I've got my system down, my criteria, all these processes. And then I get an application and I'm like, okay, they've got the income, they've got the credit score, but they've had an eviction. Let me talk to them. Okay, it was some special scenario and you buy into it, you approve it, and then 3-4 months later, you're evicting that person.
Yeah.
Your system of centralizing all of these because right now, a lot of property managers, like you said, are putting all these different tech stacks and processes together and trying to put VAs or as little human labor behind it as possible to kind of keep it all together. It's almost like they're, gluing it together and hope it stays there. You guys are taking this and trying to centralize the whole process start to finish. And And I think you take out a lot of that room for error.
When you Frankenstein it together and you're using VAs, you may get cost benefit, but you also lose insight into actually what's happening because you don't have the data between all things. And then you also have VAs who are not necessarily going to be great at explaining what's going on. And so with all these human biases and all these different tools and the data not being there, you could have a slow season because 1 year your people just operated a little bit weird and you didn't see the data that was actually pointing you at the correct answers.
Well, what would you say, Darius, to the people that are like, all right, I get what you're saying. It's better. It's more efficient, but what about ROI? Because what if that company is like, I like my Frankenstein model because it puts more money in my bank account and they're just like rooted in on short-term profit and they're happy with that. Like, what would you say to those people in terms of the ROI?
I think small property managers who are not looking to grow, that might make sense because the ROI on using a system like ours, which gets it all into one, it really gives the property manager their time back. That's probably the biggest ROI is their time. And so you have the business owner who's got the most valuable time in the business, spending their time today, looking at applications, talking to leads when their VA is sick, or managing people basically. And they can't spend their time growing their business. And so the ROI that we've put together, that's kind of like the main question everyone has. It's like, okay, but if I use Sunroom, what do I get in return? Like at the end of the day, what happens? And we put together this spreadsheet that basically shows you your time's really valuable. You probably have one other person on your team whose time is really valuable. Get almost all your time back. Let us handle the leasing. And now you have time to grow your business.
Yeah, it's like an opportunity cost question. And, I think every business owner has to ask themselves, realistically, what is my hourly rate for my work that I'm going to do? And then what's the best thing to be allocating that time to? Is it growth? Is it internal operations and leasing? Is it maintenance? Is it, buying another property management company? Everyone has to answer that question for themselves. If they think that, doing drive-bys and tours is the best thing to grow their business right now, then that's what it is. But, I would press on that. And, I think that growth is really important. One of the big things with property management is there's a lot of fixed costs that go involved. And so if you can get over a certain door threshold, it has a lot of unlocks. And so it's kind of a race to get over that amount where you could start to use the profits for the doors to pay for extra activities.
Also, just one more thing is I think every property manager knows the best return on your investment is happy tenants who renew. The most expensive thing is actually leasing it every time. And so if you got that time back, could you not only grow your business, but could you maybe satisfy your current tenants a little bit more, maybe increase your renewals percentage a little bit more? And that alone is a huge cost savings. Paying someone to lease out your property is expensive. So maybe just keep them in their homes longer.
Well, there's also when I think about it, there's probably a lot of costs people don't think about. There's signage, there's storage units for that signage. There's someone putting the labor into hopefully cataloging where the signs are so you don't lose them, have to buy more. There's Tenant Turner and other softwares you're probably using. You've got the labor cost of a leasing manager, leasing coordinator, right? And there's seasonality with leasing. So sometimes you're paying them more than they're probably producing. How do you guys look at the ROI for that? Because I get it on a national, if you're working with a REIT, this is a no brainer. I don't think we need to convince those people why that makes sense. I think that's just where the industry is headed. And I think most people are probably, these asset managers you're working with, it's probably an easy sell. But for the small, medium, larger property management companies, I bet they'd be surprised by the ROI, some of the costs they'd actually save.
Yeah, I think people are. It's a really good point. I think a lot of people, a lot of business operators are not always looking that closely at their profit and loss statement. The way that it gets designed, even it typically just bulks in leasing as like one line item, and people rarely go through and say, okay, well, what am I really paying for all those variable expenses like Zillow syndication and tenant turner and my code boxes, and the yard sign and how that depreciates and whatnot.
Yeah, yard signs and storage unit would be like office admin, and then the the softwares would be like software. You're not even categorizing it as leasing.
Yeah, so I think just taking a look at that stuff one level deeper can be really enlightening, and we've been doing that a lot with people. And like when we have sold people, we're like the least salesy people because we are like product people and like spreadsheet people, and we can make files that help. So it's mostly just like, okay, well, let's just think through this stuff together. Let's input it in. Oh, okay. Does this make sense? Does it not make sense?
Most people are not. No, most people are not into finance, even if it's their own business, and that's why they reach out. They get help. They get accountants and everything, and so it makes sense. I mean, when we've talked to people, they are almost always surprised. They're like, I didn't remember all the things it takes to lease a home. Like, now that you put it in front of me, like, thank you. And I know Zach has had a ton of experience, like, putting together business models for a decade now. And so, like, for us, it comes pretty easily. And even for us, it took us some time to kind of create this, template and show people, like, how much money are you spending to lease properties.
Yeah, we even just for fun did something this past year where we gave people so there's two different files when you think of the finance. One is almost an ROI type of thing of what are all those costs, and then what would be the gain by switching. The second thing is like a finance tool is just, okay, well, what's my game plan for the year? What are all my expenses? How am I going to go about growing my door count? What's my business going to look like at the end of the year? Almost like an annual planning, forward-looking forecast. And we, for fun, like gave that away as a file and then did a little web cast to walk people through it.
Mm-hmm.
It was like one of the better marketing campaigns we had done.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many people that wanted access to that file because I don't think that people are doing it that often.
It probably unlocks like I'm very visual, so it probably unlocks this like aha moment of the opportunity cost. Because like if you tell anybody right now, you're like, hey, listen, you stop having to lease your properties and you've got this company that's going to do a really good job and you get all your time back. Like, what are you going to do with your time? It's hard to connect the dots to like what that long-term, value is going to be. But if you put it in a spreadsheet and you're like, wait, if I have that much time, we're adding 150 doors, not 50 doors this year. Then you see the numbers and that planning shake out. Like, at that point it becomes a no-brainer, which takes the emotion out for us data analytical nerds.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about like more of like the general leasing environment, and particularly around like if you've got these national property management companies, these national players, REITs, adopting this type of technology. You've got ChatGPT, all this AI tech, all of it's kind of converging at once and creating a lot of opportunity. So if you've got all those national companies like jumping on that faster, having more resources to put into it, do you see those national companies just like gobbling up all the small property managers and that continuing to accelerate, especially like in the Sun Belt and some of those regions?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I was looking just as like one example of that, as I saw one of our buddies runs a company called Popular, and I saw last summer they had raised $53 million to do some roll-ups of taking a national property management company that's tech savvy and then buying up regional companies to get it under one roof. We've seen Pure do that over the last couple of years as well, and I know that they've got a good amount of companies.
Yeah,
I think that type of phenomenon is going to continue. Property management companies can be attractive from a EBITDA perspective, and so there's going to be just interest in taking these national players that, if they get enough brands pulled together, can invest and have internal tech teams that can give extra data lift, that can build some novel internal tools to make the companies more efficient. And I think that's going to just keep happening. And so it's going to put more pressure on the individual smaller mom and pop property management company, because the level of service is just going to kind of get brought a notch higher. like another example, I don't know how well they're doing as a company, but I saw that one of the main venture capitalists had invested in a property management company called Belong, which recently opened up Texas after doing California. Just coming from the food delivery space, when I saw tier one investors move into spaces, they have really, really big pocketbooks to spend on customer acquisition. So even if it doesn't compete directly today, it's going to start to kind of take away customers because they'll just pay out to get market share. I mean, it's like the classic, Amazon game
Right.
of just lower prices, try to hold your breath longer to gain market share. And these bigger companies are going to be able to compete in that way.
Yeah, and I think as the technology improves, I think up until now, the differentiator that a small mom and pop has is that like local, that local influence or appeal, right? They know the market, they're boots on the ground, they're there, they have those relationships, there's more trust that comes through. But I think the way trends are going now is like the average consumer, the average renter, the average person looking for a property manager, they start to trust these SaaS companies more, and more about the efficiency and process and experience. But
Yeah, and like even more reviews. Like if you're a company and you've got 10,000 residents, you've just had more hits at bat to request reviews from owners and property and renters. And so if you've got a Google page and one person has 1,000 5-star reviews and then someone else has 25 4-star reviews, who are you going to go with? Like
right. Yeah, and I think there's something like I think there's like 50 million homes that are professionally managed. I think that number's ballpark right. I mean, it's a lot of market share. It's a lot of opportunity. But on the flip side of the coin, do you see there being a path for the smaller mom and pop property managers to succeed? Like how like if that's where it's going, should they just like gear up to sell and that's the exit, or can they stay around?
no, I mean I don't think so. I think the way that they'll compete is a lot of these softwares are going to democratize the work so that everyone will have access to similar SaaS tools. And as those things get bigger, better, and better, then everyone will have access to the same type of things.
Yeah, and you're seeing that in a lot of areas, like blog content, like SEO, like that's something that we talk a lot about, for our property managers, and Live Indie, the property management company that I help run. It's like it's a lot easier to get on the first page of Google now with like Chat GPT. So if you're using it effectively and your competition isn't, you can succeed. But if you assume it, we live in a world where everyone's using it. Eventually, like the full adoption curve kind of plays out. There's going to be some winners and losers like during that process. Like, so I think the sooner the better.
Yeah, and to your point though, like the real estate has historically been really slow at following that adoption curve. Like they're not always the early adopters on this stuff, and so it's going to take a while for all this stuff to trickle through. I'm always kind of surprised at how long it takes for these things to happen. Honestly,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember self-showing locks. We knew self-showing locks were useful. The technology's been around for a long time, but it took a global pandemic to be the forcing function to be like, oh wow, like renters aren't going to tour with me in person. They don't want me coughing on them, for it to actually get pushed across the finish line. And the data was already out saying that it had better conversions.
It forced people's hand, right? So like if you take COVID, where it's like, hey, we have to make a move. If we don't make a move, we're not going to be able to compete. Like our company will fail. People made the move and figured it out, right? I think companies need to have that same level of urgency,
Right.
Yeah.
unrelated to COVID and a national pandemic. They should see this threat of, the technology movement that's happening. They should see this threat and act with the same level of urgency, or honestly, they're just going to get left behind.
I mean, I'm kind of curious, like, and this is kind of a, playing devil's advocate here. Like, let's say in 5 or 10 years, all the smaller property managers have the same tools. They're using the same things basically as these larger national ones. For your investment property, Zach, like, would you go for a national or would you go for a local if they all have the same tools?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it would kind of. I think a lot of things in real estate are circumstantial, and there is definitely an element beyond all this stuff that just comes down to relationships.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of these groups have had such strong hooks with owners, and there haven't been big companies that came in and just disrupted everything. Is a lot of times what happens is someone buys an investment property, maybe me in this type of scenario,
Mm-hmm.
and the person I work with to get that home, I ask them, hey, who do you recommend? And you get a personal referral. I'd probably be more likely to go with the bigger company that I have more trust, but I could see myself in certain instances, if I trusted that, to just go with whoever they recommended. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, yeah.
Go ahead, Darius.
I was just gonna say, like, I work at a tech company that's working for large PMs, and there's still something inside of me that says, well, if the smaller PM that's local has the same tools, then I feel more comfortable with the smaller one because I'm like so traumatized by like AT&T or like these large companies where I'm like, I need to get a hold of someone and I can't.
Yeah, that's my gut reaction too. I think I would go with the local company, but I think it's relationship driven. I think also there's there's parts of this puzzle that can't be replaced by like AI and by, technology and software. Like an example of that's going to be like service providers. When you think about a property management company, other than leasing, the other big bucket is maintenance, right? Like you can't go change out a water heater with a software, like an algorithm, right? You got to have somebody that buys the water heater, goes there and changes it out. And that's a big part of the ROI for an investor, right? And so that's another layer of relationship. You have the property management company has to have those relationships and access to those vendors. And so I think kind of like the relationship to communication part would be probably where, that'd be the differentiator of the local company. But final thought is like, I think that the scenario we've created is probably a bit extreme because the reality is most of the mom and pops, they're not going to react that quickly. Like you said, like the adoption curve, they're going to fall behind and they're just going to find themselves in a position where they're selling. So how do you just make the decision to act, right? I think that's what it's going to come down to.
So one thing that's kind of interesting, so you had mentioned, guys swinging the hammer during the remodel, during the construction phase, as being really valuable to have those boots on the ground. Totally agree. One phenomenon that we've seen inside of the SFR landscape, though, is there's been these really big companies recently, like Lesson, that have came in, like $1 billion deal, and they are starting to do the unbundling of property management. So property management is a lot of things, right? You've got all the rehab stuff on the front side, then you have all the ongoing collections of funds, and then evictions if you can't collect it. Then you have the maintenance layer, then you have leasing layer, then you have some other kind of like financial services layers, and then you might even have like
marketing,
like I was gonna say like buying and selling of the homes if they're tapping into the investors in that way. So a lot of different like functional areas. Some people believe that all of those things are going to become separate nodes that do those types of things incredibly well. Like we started to see it for that Lesson example.
What's Lesson? I want to look them up really quick.
Yeah,
Lessen.
Yeah, I'll just pop this up on the screen here. We're going to give them a little feature. I don't even know what this is, but we're going to pull it up.
Yeah, pull them up real quick.
So this is on the maintenance side. Am I reading that right?
Any type of service, really. I mean, maintenance is probably one of the bigger ones.
Yeah, maintenance and rehab. That company was a deal that happened with SMS Assist. It was SMS Assist and Lesson, and they came through to establish a vendor network and then build a pipeline for those vendors by getting big partnerships with the major real estate investment trusts. So they're just doing, you can see it on the stats on this page, they're just doing thousands of jobs that they've playbooked now.
Yeah.
280,000 properties.
Yeah, 280,000 properties they're doing it for. So, like a lot of the investors have figured out we don't have to reinvent the wheel when we go and we take a vintage home. We're just going to go through, rip up the carpet, make the walls all white instead of lime green. We're going to switch in that white countertop instead of that old, wooden junk that was in there. And then we're going to put in new appliances. Okay, we've got a playbook.
Right.
Okay, just go down that list. And groups like this have been enabling some of these bigger providers to scale because they can have national coverage. They know if there's going to be a delay in that stuff. These companies are starting to get economies of scale so they can get better pricing from the vendors. And since they're buying so many materials, they're even able to get cheaper materials on some of the, instead of going to Lowe's and getting the stuff that's on sale, you're able to work out these big partnerships with like a GE type of company where you're like, I need 10,000 refrigerators. Well, you're probably going to get a better deal.
Right.
Well, I guess the reason we're bringing all this up is because we said, well, the local guys have relationships, right? It's like maybe relationships with the owners, relationships with contractors in the area. But it seems like, well, here's a tool that makes it so your relationship is less valuable and probably a tool that you would have to adopt if you want to stay relevant.
Yeah, I'm talking about basically two trends that are happening across the whole industry: unbundling and consolidation.
Yep.
So another area to talk about consolidation that I think is kind of interesting. So there's also going to be consolidation of the long tail of retail investors. So today, if you're looking across the housing stock, the homes are owned by mom and pop investors that have one or two properties. All of the homes that exist in the United States, only about now 3 or 4% are owned by big companies. Some markets, it's a lot higher than that because that's the active hotbed that they're buying in. But if you look at it as a national average, it's only a couple percent. Now, there's a lot of investors that can no longer find yield within markets like the NASDAQ and the S&P 500. It just had a really long run and probably not, much more before there's a pullback. So these really big pension groups and private equity players, they want to find a safe place to park the capital that has a good long-term hold strategy. So groups like KKR and BlackRock and other big organizations like this are rapidly buying homes. Now, for the most part, they've been penciled down as interest rates have been high, but most economists, despite that, say that within the next 10, 15 years, there's going to be about 40% of that housing stock owned by these institutional players.
Right.
I mean, there's a chance that it's a really crazy thing.
That's an insane number. Wasn't there some I heard some buzz about, I think this would be a terrible idea. Don't need to get too much into politics here, but I heard the government was talking about trying to limit the institutional buyers of residential property.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bill that was out this last month that was trying to prevent this from happening.
Yeah.
And that's probably the only thing that will stop it from happening is some sort of government intervention from it. Just because there's a lot of economies of scale you have from having more homes. You get more density in markets, so you can get cheaper jobs done. You get better level of service. So there's definitely economies of scale and network effects that come from it. And then even on the capital side, as you get more money, it's easier to get more money. So you're able to compete with buyers for that property because, you're not, that's part of the reason why government's getting involved is because it is a little messed up. You're coming in with $1 billion checkbook against starter home, family getting
Sally trying to get their first home. Yeah.
Right.
And you're building the house and then leasing it to them because they can't afford it. For more than they could have just had a mortgage payment. It is pretty nuts at the scale that it's happening.
And one of the things that is okay, so consolidation probably going to happen in that space. Something else inside of the housing market that I think it abuts to the same thing that I'm talking about, but we as a country have just done a horrible job at building more supply. The only reason why this model is working is because every year the homes are going up a ton in value, and it's just a classic supply-demand curve. If we had more supply, houses wouldn't go up so much in value, and there'd be more supply for everyone else, to go find a place to live.
Yeah.
We just aren't building.
Do you see that stopping? Like, I think you'd said earlier, like the only way it stops is that the government steps in. Like, is that like, what do you do with that, information?
So I think for the first thing of buying scattered site homes, like these old vintage things, that has probably more negatives. For the build for rent side, there are probably some problems of it just being a build for rent and not something that cycles in to be a home that gets sold and it just being exclusively rentals. But for the most part, build for rent is a really net positive for society because it's going to result in just more overall housing. So there's going to be less people competing for the same limited amount of homes. So I like what's happening with build for rent now. I think that it's good for the consumer. We don't want to just live in apartments downtown. Yeah. We want to have room for our dog. We want to feel like we have our own space.
Yeah.
I think that there's going to be lots of benefits from it. We've seen more new home starts for build for rent than ever before. Every year's the biggest year ever for it. But we're still, we're not talking about that many projects. We're talking like 10,000, units coming online. We need to have like 10x that for there to be a really meaningful impact.
Well, it's happening in markets like Atlanta, right? Like it's not happening at the level, that's where it needs to like expand is like more locations, right? Because this is only affecting like certain markets.
Yeah, totally. It's all the ones that, are Sunbelt places where there's been a lot of data that there's net positive migration there. Phoenix has been big, different pockets of Florida, Atlanta, Dallas is one of the biggest right now for build for rent communities. But it's somewhat challenging for these operators to even conduct them because when you do a project like this, you're buying out 2 years in the future and you're typically finding farmland that you build the projects on. And you might be wrong. There might not be demand for 30 miles outside of city center in this random obscure farmland.
Right.
We've heard that if you build it, they will come. Well, do you really want to take the $40-50 million bet? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think there's the supply demand effect in the other way too, where if they're looking in certain markets and they're building in certain markets, they're making those markets more attractive for the average person to move to because of the benefits, the demand's going to increase. In markets like a Phoenix, more people are going to move out there. And so the price might not, it might still go up, even with more supply. But, that's just going to be a push and pull. Nobody can really predict the future there or else, we wouldn't be talking about this stuff. We'd just all be rich and sipping a drink somewhere. But, I think that's fascinating. I think we've got a little bit more time here. I want to talk before we jump off. I want to talk a little bit about, we touched on the AI side of things. I want to dig into that a little bit more. You'd mentioned, I think Darius, you mentioned this to me when we were chatting a few weeks ago, something about like seeing like conversion rates that were a lot higher with just you guys tinkering around and just getting started on the AI side of things. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I mean, we've always been measuring our conversion rates basically at every step of the funnel. And the top of the funnel is probably the most important, which is you got one lead. Basically, a lead is someone who inquired on Zillow or somehow expressed that they're interested in learning something. And then you got to get them to go tour the home. And that's kind of perfect for the AI as it is today, which is basically a chatting interface where it kind of learns what the listing offers and then just serves it up over some type of text. And so before we had the AI implemented, we have a mix of onshore or offshore teams or nearshore, however you want to say. And they were converting, let's say, anywhere between 13 to 18% of the leads to get to tours. So that would be, let's just say 15%. So 15% of the leads that came in ended up touring the homes. Now, I'm sure some people know their conversion rates. Maybe that's better or worse. I'm not sure. But we implemented the AI. And in the beginning, it actually matched what the humans were doing. So it was getting around that 15 to 18% or so. But then just in a matter of about 1 to 2 months, and what we did was we learned where it wasn't working well. We basically read a ton of conversations and trained it a little bit differently. And training is a fancy way of just saying like, when someone asks this, answer like this. or when a home is occupied, don't go tell people to tour the home. And so we would do those types of tweaks, and then after 1 or 2 months, the conversion rate was above 20%.
Wow.
And so, the AI works all the time, speaks every language, understands everything that our database, that the listing has to offer, and is now converting, over 7% more, which is, if you think about it, that's around like 30 to 50% higher conversion rate, actually.
And then for a company, we could take the people that were doing that, put them into more skilled labor types of activities.
Yeah.
So the labor cost goes away. Also, there's not a ramp that you have to do where you're going up and down with seasonality for headcount.
Totally.
There's no more training or onboarding and getting people to learn everything. And then better for the renters that they can ask a question at any point of the day or night and get an instant response. And we're going to just keep working on it. I could see it being even higher.
Yeah.
And you got to keep in mind, when we are giving the blended conversion rate, we're working across Class A properties, Class C properties, working across 14 different markets. So it's a really broad stock of housing. You're not just going to work on one type of home.
Mm-hmm.
So it's handling lots and lots of different permutations of things. And we also work with 30 plus partners where each one has different policies. They have different setups of things. There's different logic on what times they can even tour. Lots of different details inside of that. But that to say, it's trained on a pretty wide array of data.
Right.
And, look, some of these tools are starting to get incorporated into products. I think that's going to keep happening.
Mm-hmm.
I think the technology that's happening with large language models and just these transformers as just a breakthrough is something that we haven't seen in a decade, as just a really cool thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible.
I think the training side, when Darius was talking through that, it's like when, explaining to just the average person what that means, train the AI model. It sounds so intense, but when you position it like, hey, when you say this, don't respond this way, respond more like this way. Imagine that in 20 years ago, that was with your employees, training them, and then 90% of them don't listen to you, and then you're firing someone, and then you're hiring someone, trying to train them again. But not only, I think the other piece for me is not only is there that part of it where the AI just knows once you train it once, it just gets better, never messes up. You also have the data of all these different companies, all these different scenarios where, if I'm the average property manager and I would work with you guys, I get to glean off of a lot of that data and information within our process, because you're also seeing those other use cases.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think AI is really good at in terms of these conversation summaries and being able to have a pulse on what was talked about is we're displaying inside of our partner portal the status of leads. So someone who is an owner of a home might be like, hey, look, I had 25 people inquire on this home. Where did all the 25 people go? What were they saying about the home, and why are they not advancing with an application?
Right.
That's a really hard thing to answer before, because a human would have to go read a whole string of texts. Maybe they had 50 texts back and forth before they arrived at that decision, and then go report back to the owner a synopsis and all that. We're now applying that AI in a way where you're like, okay, for those 25 renters, what did each one of them say? Give me a summary of the endpoint of why they decided not to advance. And then even a summary of the summaries to say, well, what's the current state? Okay, well, most people are saying that they really like the location of the home and the price, but the finish outs weren't great. They really didn't like how you painted the living room pink. And everyone's been complaining about the smell from the previous tenant. And we learned that from the text that just happened. So I think there's going to be all sorts of cool things out that we'll be able to apply this AI thinking to.
I have a feature request for you guys. I think you just made me think of this as you were talking. Is before you were talking about your sunspot and the price recommendation, and that's based on the data relative to showing volume, and then your data on the rents, and then that's pretty much the driver. Why can't we just have a little toggle where we're all right, just let the AI price this thing? Because then it takes care of the whole I mean, as long as like I approve it, I'm like, hey, I signed up for this program. I want to turn that feature on. Like,
Yeah.
I want the AI to price it because the AI can take in more data points and more perspectives. Which the communication, right? If somebody's saying like, hey, the finishes aren't as good, the finishes aren't good, it's not clean. Well, the AI could also tell me like, hey, send somebody out to like clean it because we've had 4 people say that, rather than like doing that a month in.
That's actually, I mean, it's a good product request because we've already started building it. So
Nice.
what you're talking about is what we call partner tasks, or we have a task list. And so, there's 2 types of tasks. The condition of the home needs to get improved somehow, like someone toured the property and said there's bugs or that it smells bad or something like that. It automatically reads all the tour feedback, categorizes what it was about, and then gives you a task. If you want to do it, you can kind of track how many tasks have I completed this month. What do I still need to do?
Well, before you move on, Darius, I would want that tied to lead volume, right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm an investor and I'm like, hey, you guys are recommending X, Y, and Z because the AI is like categorized and said, hey, do this, spend $5,000. I'd want to be able to go, well, if I spend that $5,000, I'm going to hit, $2,700 in rent instead of $2,400 in rent based on the predictive like lead flow or something like that.
Right.
Just to make your job harder. Just throwing shit out there. I don't know.
There's some smart way. Yeah, no, there's definitely a smart way to combine not just the count of leads, but actually what they're saying, just the overall sentiment of, are they excited about this home, or are most people not that excited? Yeah, I mean, most of the time it doesn't even need to be that complicated because it's just not that complicated of a product. It's like, it's a house. Is it nice or is it not nice?
Yeah.
And how long do you generally want to wait for vacancy to maybe get lucky and fill it up versus just spend the $2,000 to fix the thing and then you don't worry about it for another 10 years. So yeah, I think we're always playing with like, how do we talk to owners or asset managers in a way that helps them understand the ROI? It's like, if I lower the rent now, how much more vacancy can I save? Or, how much vacancy can I basically save if I lower the rent? Does it make sense to keep it high and just have a longer vacancy? Because at the end of the 12-month lease term, I'll just have more money on one of those paths. Plus all of the little, conditional things like you're saying, which is like, hey, people are wanting me to spend money to fix the house. Is that even going to be worth it?
Yeah, because there's the time and then there's the money part of like, what's that cost? And then, what's the outcome to be? Because I talk to a lot of people where they're like, I'd rather just do nothing and just get the rate where it should be today, do nothing.
Right.
Which isn't always the right, I don't always agree with that. And sometimes I do, if it's just like, a couple people have walked through and said, hey, we need central air. Well, some places like in certain markets, like a window AC and a 2-bed bungalow, that's better. Just keep it and whatever that rate is, roll with it. But no, I think AI has so much. I feel like we're just scratching the surface. I feel like like comparing it to the internet just came out and it's like people are starting to build websites. You know what I mean? It's like we're not really that far along. So I'm excited to see what you guys do with it.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys have done some really cool use case of being able to incorporate it for search and getting found. I mean, I feel like that's just a really smart thing. It's like, how can you get use the AI to do all of my marketing activities and help me grow? I mean, it's like a really good use case because that's one of the main things that's on property managers' minds is, how do I grow?
Well, now I'm thinking of I don't know if we're kind of wrapping it up or what, but I was thinking of like a good kind of like capping convo or question, which is like, okay, so you're a property, you want to become a property manager. Maybe you are one, but you're thinking, hey, I want to run a property management company. How these guys are saying the future of property management is going to look.
Right.
I don't want to like get bought out. I want to have my own company, with my name on it, but be doing it really, intelligently and in the modern way. Like, what does that look like? Like, if you gave me 5 to 7 bullet points on what to make sure to do, like, what would we tell people to do?
I'll let Zach, you start, and then I'll jump in. I've got a couple thoughts there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for one,
if you started it,
if I started it, I would be unbundling all of these services and finding the best possible vendor for each one of the services. So I'd be tapping into I'd be tapping into like a lesson like we just talked about for some of those more bespoke services that I don't want to do.
Right.
And then for my technology stack, I would be looking at some of the best things inside of the market for that. So, there's a lot of cool things there. I won't have to spend time going through each one of the SaaS tools, but I'd be going to the conferences like IMN to determine for each functional area what is the best SaaS tool that I can use to run my business.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd be trying to be the guy behind the scenes to see all those things are running really efficiently. And then I'd be working mostly on growth. And I'd be doing that through really smart business development partnerships. So if I see that there's going to be build for rent as a hot category, how can I go find my way to get some build for rent business? If I see these really large groups that are going to get business in my market, and I'm maybe I'm setting up shop in these key Sunbelt places, well, how can I go partner with these institutional investors to be part of that strategy as they're buying a ton of homes? So to just tighten it up, use the best technology, figure out how to incorporate it in the business, then just catch these waves instead of being afraid of them. Figure out how you can just ride them and then have a much bigger, better company because of it.
How many people do you think your company has? I mean, let's say you're trying to get to like 200 to 500 homes.
I think that's too small of a mindset. I think you can run a company that has thousands of homes and you can have it pretty minimally from a head count because there's other really smart people that are working on these other things.
Like less than 5 people, you'd say?
I mean, look, and just we've been working on it a little bit more than the number I'll quote because there are some other things we had to figure out on our kind of journey. But really over the last 3 years, we got 10,000 homes. Yeah. I mean, most property managers that are listening to this are probably at 300 homes.
Right.
Like we've taken a different path and we've gotten a lot of scale. And not to say that everyone can't do the same type of thing. It's just trying to think about where is the puck going and then how do you skate there before everyone else does? I mean, you just have to try to figure out how to become part of these things instead of being afraid of them.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback off that, like because I think Zach, you've got like a very grand, like if you're gonna go do it, go big, go at the 10,000 home level, which I think a lot of people resonate with. But if you're on like the other side of that coin, I think the simplest way to go about it, if you're like, hey, I want to run a 500 door property management company in like a Midwest market, you can make hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can make like $1 million. You can make a lot of money just doing that. And so for those types of people, I feel like simple. It's just like find a company that can build a website, find a company that can get you on the first page of Google over time. I try to outsource leasing as much as you can. Don't spend a bunch of time up front, like running that process. I mean, subtle knock to like Sunroom leasing there, like hire somebody if they're in your market or come up with systems if they're not, where you can, try to replicate it or, Frankenstein it as much as you can, but don't put a whole lot of human capital into it. And then I think it's just VAs, right? It's just VAs and then, focusing on growth. It's like getting all the operations stuff out of your way, admin operations. There's companies like Proper, which help just with the like financial part of running a property management business. Like you pay them.
Yeah, that's a great example of unbundling. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you just $2,000-$3,000 a month, and they like do all this stuff that you probably are really bad at, and you don't have to hire somebody because hiring somebody would have been a lot more expensive. But to your point, how many people, Darius, like Live Indy? This, and we've got a lot of customers that are like, we could use as examples too, but like Live Indy, we're close to 500 doors and it's owner operator. We're going to hire a market manager, like operations manager. And then it's all VAs. And I think we have 7 VAs right now. Like we could have 10 VAs at 1,000 doors. And then it's just VAs plus software. You leverage AI a little bit to assist the VAs. And I think that's really all you need.
Yeah. And I think one of the pieces of property management that is something that every property manager has to determine what they're best at instead of just being a vanilla version of everything.
That's a good point.
One thing that as you were asking me the question, I was thinking about how right now something that's really been hot is helping with acquisitions of a certain type of property type, or offloading stuff through dispositions. And I'd probably get my hand into some of those things. So, if I'm making $100 a month off of management fees, that's great. If I sell a home for $500,000, which a lot of these markets, that's like just an average investment property, at 3% take, that's 15,000. That's 10x the management of one door.
Yeah.
So you got to figure out how to balance the kind of day-to-day of those types of things, but then also figure out those big time revenue boosters.
Yeah, and I really like that point about finding something that where you can specialize and differentiate. Because if we talked earlier about what if everyone just like runs the same game plan, like how do you differentiate? We kind of talked a little bit about, relationship, communication, some of those, softer factors, but important. I think like if you went into it and you said, hey, I'm going to be the expert in helping my clients acquire certain types of properties. I'm going to be, maybe you're like, you know what, I'm not going to work with a Sunroom Leasing. I'm going to do it all in-house, and we're going to be like the old school way of doing it and use that as part of our pitch. Like maybe that works for you. Or maybe we're going to build our own in-house maintenance arm and we're going to like make some profit there. And, it's not all about automation and efficiency. It could be partly like just pick your spot, like pick what you like to do. Like, the book, The One Thing, like find the thing you want to do and then automate and systemize, throw software at everything else.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we tend to think really big. And I think some people just want to have a, fairly easy job, make good pay, do something that they, don't get bored doing every day.
Look, both are great paths. I mean, we came from an aggressive thing. Or my last company that I did with my co-founder of Sunroom was the second largest employer in Texas. We're no stranger for growth. We like that. But honestly, I've been really encouraged by talking to a lot of different property owners. It's almost, Christmas time. And last year, one of the property managers we were talking to, they had done this really cool thing with their employees where they gave every employee $100. And they said, go out and make someone's day in our community. And I thought it was just so cool of just taking this thought of like, really relatively not that much money for what they're going to have for profits for the year. And they're getting everyone involved with philanthropy for the company and just thinking about how to better their business and the people that they're touching at a local level.
Yeah.
And I just like to think about how, we're working in an industry where we're kind of working with one of the most closest, intimate pieces of people's lives. This is their shelter. It's where they, have safety. And so we're in a really good position to have positive impact on community because of that.
Yeah, I like that. And I think we're kind of wrapping up, like tying this back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, if you can have the time, if you can get your time back, you can even focus on things like, you have time to focus on things like philanthropy or, just, some of those things that, you care more about and you can be passionate about. But, yeah, guys, if anything else to add on your end, I feel like this is a really good conversation, and I'll have to drop some, you'll have to send me that ROI calculator. I need to put that in the show notes so people can play around with it.
Oh yeah, we'll send it to you. Yeah. This was good talking, Matt. Thanks for having us on.
Awesome, guys.
It's good combo.
We'll, I'm sure, talk soon. Otherwise, how can people get a hold of you if they have any questions or want to learn more about Sunroom?
Sunroomleasing.com. Hit us up there. I think that's the best way. There's a button to get a demo or just talk to us to learn more. Yeah, sunroomleasing.com.
Cool. All right, guys. Appreciate your time. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.